morning. It's Wednesday, September 25th. This is BWI Live. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel. T-Frank, the final September Wednesday is here. I don't know where the rest of 2024 has gone so far. I don't know where the first month of the season has gone so far, but here we are. It is September 25th. We are at the final Wednesday practice availability of the week, and Big Ten play is here. So we got a lot to get to today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It is BWI Live, and we have some special subscription information. We'll get to you a little bit over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. But first, T-Frank, we have a lot to cover over the next hour, but my first question for you is, where did the rest of 2024 go, and what happened to the first 9 months of the year?
You know what I'm focused on? My wife's birthday is in about a month, so okay. I've got to figure out something for her birthday. It's the annual, like, right after our anniversary, right before Christmas. So you got to hit the sweet spot of her birthday's in late October. And she's the hardest person to buy something for. So I usually start in mid-September. But you're right, the panic starts to set in once we get to October, and we are dangerously close to October. But yeah, I'm interested to see where the rest of this year takes us, because it has certainly been on one trajectory since probably since I would say the middle of training camp, at least for the Penn State football team, where, I started to get, I think, much more optimistic about this team under Andy Kotelnicki with the offense and Tom Allen with defense. And so, that attrition through the first month, we'll see where that lands us in the broader picture of the new Big Ten and the new more competitive schedule. I'm fascinated to see how this plays out.
Yeah, me too, T-Frank. One birthday gift for your wife recommendation: do it during the bye week. Because
that's the plan. Yes, that is the plan.
There probably won't be time. And that's the same goes for everybody here listening to BWI Live today, is do it during the bye week. Because once we get into the latter portion of the schedule, it will not be as easy to do. So let's get into it. Penn State is back on the practice field this evening. James Franklin will speak following practice. Some players will talk as well. But before those interviews happen, you guys will be out on the practice field checking things out. So let's open up with the offense. That's where you generally spend most of your time. T-Frank, what are you hoping to see when you go out there tonight?
So it is important that your weather forecast brought to you by me looking outside the window. It's rainy today. It's supposed to be rainy all day. If anybody
wants to sponsor the weather report on the Wednesday show, please get in touch with T-Frank.
Yeah, I mean, AccuWeather only originates in State College. I don't know what they're waiting for the number one Penn State football podcast in America. But I don't have control over those things. But anyway, it's been rainy the last 2 days, and if there is rain in the forecast, it's usually 50-50 whether we'll be inside or outside. We're going to be inside.
You're going to be inside today. Yes,
oh, yeah.
We're 100% certain of that. Yeah.
So that limits some of our understanding of the Penn State situation, because being in Haluba Hall is vastly different than being outside, where everything is a little more viewable. So we'll get up close and personal with the tight ends and the running backs and the ball security drills, but the offensive line and the defensive line will be across Haluba Hall with probably 75 to 80 bodies in between us and them at any one time. So it's going to be focused mostly on the things that we can see in our vision. But at the same time, there are always things to learn from practice, even inside. So I'm looking specifically for I think the skill position players and how and where they're used. Some of these things, Greg, the problem is the thing I'm looking at most, I can't really talk about in terms of what I see when they get together and they're running passing patterns. That's something that I'm not going to talk about, because that is a direct impact on the game later. So those main things are that. But from the offensive side, everyone's been relatively healthy. So it's kind of all systems go at this point for the offense.
Yeah, it certainly is. And obviously one thing we talked about last week that you can probably pay even closer attention to this week is which guys are in scout team uniforms, which guys are not. Some guys were not last week because Penn State played Kent State. And as we told you last Wednesday and Tuesday and Thursday, and I think every other day of last week, Kent State was not a very good football team. And unfortunately, both of the quarterbacks that got hurt during the Penn State win are out for the year. So they are going
Oh
to
no.
now, yeah, they're both out for the year. So they will go into a even further spiral than they already have. So curious to see what guys are in practice uniforms, what guys are in scout team uniforms tonight.
That's
But
a
when
good
you talk
point.
about the
Yeah.
offense, you're right. The health has been very good on that side of the ball. T. Frank, defense, not so much. And so you mentioned the defense will be a bit harder to see if practice is in Haluba Hall, which we expect it to be. But anyone in particular you're watching for there? And I'm assuming, if I had to guess, seeing if number 0 Dominic DeLuca is out there will probably top your list.
Yeah, so I haven't gotten
And
the
Kobe
problem is I
King
haven't
too, I
gotten to
guess.
the defense at any point this year to kind of got to train your eyes a little bit to like where people typically are and how they typically operate that particular part of practice. So I'll actually get a chance to see more of the defense today than I normally do because they're so close. So yeah, Dom DeLuca is one thing, and then I'd say the depth linebackers. How do they go through drills? Who's working with whom in terms of alignments and who's where? Because we've seen them cross train a little bit, and then we've seen guys play multiple positions on the field. So I guess the guy I'm looking for primarily is Tamia Robinson. Where is he playing? Where is he practicing? And how involved is he? Just because like that depth, the conversation at the linebacker spot is something that we highlighted after KJ Winston's injury. More depth at any of these positions, I think, is important. And then obviously Dejon Lane, how he's going through practice. I have a pretty firm idea of how they're going to use him and where he's going to be used. But at the same time, you want to see those things because you can't, even when we're there, waste reps because you have a limited amount of time to prepare for this game. So you need to make sure that you're maximizing even your routes on air and your coverage drills, and everything has a little bit more context to it when you're in the season. So I'd say those are the major things.
Yeah, no question about it. James Franklin's going to talk after practice, and I think when you're looking at what he could tell reporters following the team's Wednesday practice ahead of Illinois, I'm pretty sure the first question is probably going to relate to what the first question was for him on Monday. And is that any update on whether or not Dominic DeLuca or Cam Wallace have suffered a long-term injury? And so I think you're probably going to see things start there. But if it was you, if you had question number 1, T. Frank, where would you go with it?
Oh, this is not fair. This is not, because I don't do reporter stuff. I do scheme and analysis things. So I'm asking different things. And it's actually going to get into what we talk about next, which is underrated players on Penn State's team.
Right.
I'm so annoyed because somebody asked about Abdul Carter and the defensive line and getting a sack, and James Frank transitioned into talking about Zane Durant and how underrated he's been. I do have the receipts that on the artist formerly known as Twitter, I was pointing out how good he was playing even during the game against Kent State. So I want to know who the other players are that he thinks are on that list. I have a list, and I think you have a list as well, that we're going to get to on this show of guys we think are playing at an underrated pace so far.
Yeah, no question about it. Let me get to a couple of things in the chat. This question here. So their scout team throughout the season. At the end of the year, Penn State will pick a scout team offensive and defensive player of the year. So, no, my point being, like, Tyzer Denmark's a good example, right? So he was in his number 4 uniform last week and obviously played against Kent State. But if he is not going to be greenlit to play, or if they don't think they're going to use him this week against Illinois, he'll go into a number of a player he is mimicking from Illinois. So that's what I'm getting to there. Not better players. I get what you're asking, but it's not necessarily better players. It's players who can replicate things that are not going to be playing in the game.
Yeah, and I think it's also, the skill sets and who are you using for what particular situation. So, like, the most important players on the Illinois offense, I don't know that Penn State has a 6'3", 250-pound running back. So, do they borrow a tight end? Do they borrow somebody else from a different position? I don't think so. I think that will be Quentin Martin. Typically, that's what they do, is just kind of like, our players are good enough to replicate that generally. But it is something that I'm always interested in, is who's chosen to represent whom on the other team, because you do want to have like a size and general skill set analysis. And so I think the other interesting position is the receiver position. They've got some big, good outside receivers. So who's that guy that steps up right now? I think if he were healthy, Peter Gonzalez would be a great opportunity for Penn State to replicate some of the skills they have this weekend from the Illinois offense. But, who are those guys and what numbers are they wearing is part of that conversation for sure.
Yeah, Pat Bryant, the big-time receiver from Illinois, he has 6 touchdowns, which leads the Big Ten this year. I'll be curious to see which guy pops up with that number on. But one more question from the chat, T. Frank, and then we'll get back on topic here. David asked, what is long-term? So we did a long article over at bluewhiteillustrated.com last week. If you're not a subscriber, you can check it out by using this week's special promo code. It's We Are, and it is a flash sale at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Sign up for 50% off an annual subscription. It's billed $4.99 monthly, so check this out over there. Use promo code We Are. But yeah, we did get into this long-term, short-term bumps and bruises conversation last week over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. And what I would tell you is long-term, I think this is where I'm at with it at T. Frank, and you can tell me if you agree, disagree, or otherwise. But long-term, when James Franklin says there's a long-term injury, it's going to be a few weeks for sure, maybe even months. But the player could possibly come back to the team during the season, whether that's late in the year, whether that's during a potential playoff run, etc. So that's long-term. Short-term and bumps and bruises, it's more like a Tamir Robinson situation.
A week-to-week thing, right?
Yes, right, where you might miss some of a game and then all of the next one, but then you can return like he did after missing Bowling Green and coming back for Kent State. So anyway, you can check that out over at bluewhiteillustrated.com, where again we have a flash sale running. Use promo code We Are today. Also remember, like and subscribe if you're listening to us here on YouTube on Wednesday, September 25th, and we appreciate you doing that. And we are now going to move along to the 3 underrated Penn State players so far, T. Frank. So I believe we have a graphic for that. We do. And I'm going to let you open the bidding with a guy that both of us have on our list, and it's a guy James Franklin shouted out this week as well.
Yeah, I'd say the number one player that's playing the best for the fewest number of stats is Zane Durant. This guy is, whether it's the run game or the passing game, is almost unblockable. And we talk about having edge rushers and having the ability to get pressure from the outside, but the best defenses, they have 3 guys that you have to account for. And then you take on a new dimension of difficulty, because in those situations, you don't have to blitz as much. You blitz with intentionality as opposed to necessity, because you don't need to send extra players in order to get pressure. And they're teetering on that, because I think that, there is some advancement you can get from those edge rushers. They are not playing lights out. They're not playing to an all-American level, but they're playing well. And so when you have Zane Durant on the inside, who I think has 1 sack so far this year, but has multiple quarterback hits, multiple pressures, and
leads
from
the team with 5 according to Pro Football Focus in terms of quarterback hurries. Yep.
Yeah, and so, but it's the impact of those immediate wins that he's getting, especially when you watch in the run game, not getting a stat because he gets into the backfield and blows up the front side of a run, and a running back immediately has to cut back, and suddenly, a defensive end or a linebacker who's crashing from the second level gets that stat. But there are guys who set the table for that, and Zane Durant, time and time again, has done that as both a pass rusher and as a run defender, where he has ascended to kind of that next level of player on the interior, as somebody who I'm now having to consider, Greg, where is he going in the draft? Because I had not seen him as a first round pick because of some of his physical limitations. I'm having to reconsider that, because he is kind of entering that territory of an Ed Oliver from his time at Houston, where you relatively unblockable. And so I'm curious as to how that's going to project into Big Ten games, where he's not going to have so much of an advantage from an athleticism standpoint over some of the players he's going to face. Although this weekend, I think he still does.
Yeah, I completely agree. We have to break one rule so we don't break another one, T. Frank, and that's because our good buddy David has a super chat for us. So we always say, if you super chat, and we appreciate it, we will get to your question first. This actually fits better in the next segment, but David also said he wasn't sure how long he can hang out, so I want to get to his question before he has to roll. Will this be the indicator of the offense's progress so far this year? I mean, in my opinion, there's no question. This is probably, and we're going to get into this more later, David, so if you can't listen to the whole show live, please be sure to check it out either back here on YouTube or wherever you get your audio. But to me, there's no question. This is the best secondary Penn State will face this season. They are ball hawks, and they are going to be challenged on Saturday. The passing attack, there's no question. But Illinois has the same situation going on with Penn State's passing attack being the best one it faced.
Yeah, and so I think the indicator to me, you're right. This defense can challenge Penn State in different ways at both levels of the football. They're not as good as they were up front against as they were last year, where they were dominant. But I think those edge rushers, and there are some strong players in the middle of that defense where if you're not playing your best, this is a heat check for some of the Penn State offensive linemen who are playing okay, but I want to see how they play against comparable talent. And so there were some struggles against the strength of Kent State, which was their defensive line last week, which is saying something for Kent State that's the strength of their team, and Penn State racked up as many yards as they did. I'm interested to see how Penn State's offensive line run blocks, because that has to be the foundation of this offense. They have to continue to have that threat of the run that you have to account bodies into the box. Right. Because if you shut that down, the passing attack gets much more difficult. And I still think as much as Drew Aller has taken steps, you don't want to put your quarterback in a situation where he has to win you the game against the best teams. You want this team to have a complete and balanced approach, which we've now talked too much about balance on offense over the last 2 years. But I think that's important. That's where I'm looking for the indicator of the offensive health going forward. If they dominate this team on the ground, then I'm going to be very optimistic about their chances to do that against most teams on the schedule.
All right, David, thank you for your donation to the channel. More on the Penn State-Illinois matchup later in the show. But T. Frank, let's get to your next player on this list of players who are the three underrated Penn State players so far. Who's next?
Yeah, this one, we're going 1 through 3 because I put it the wrong way on the. So we went with number 1. Now we're going number 2. Venga Ioane has been awesome. He is we talk about these guys that don't register stats, and they're interior guys on the D line, interior guys on the offensive line. It's hard to be underrated and be somebody who has the ball all the time. Like a quarterback isn't going to be underrated, but Venga Ioane has quietly been doing dominant work on the interior. This is what I'm talking about. He has been a dominant run blocker on the interior and has made significant movement when he goes into a double team, or he's a guy who has to get a down block or one of those blocks that washes out the side of the line in a zone scheme. He makes guys fly across the screen like I have not seen from an offensive lineman in college on a regular basis. We talk about pancake blocks a lot. And Greg, I think there's still this understanding or this idea that dudes are ass over tin cups. Is it ass over teacups? Whichever one it is, whatever my grandma used to say. When you pancake them, that's not how it works. Typically, guys don't just blow another 300-pound human off the ball and they fall over. Right. Typically, there's other things going on, but Venga is getting difference-making movement in the run game. And as pass protector, he's been very, very good. He's not going to be challenged as a pass protector in this game, I don't think. But some of these guys are almost as big as him. They have a nose tackle that's pretty stout in the middle. And not saying like I'm talking about projecting it forward to this game specifically, but he has been dominant so far. And so, again, this is a guy I'm thinking of that I was projecting to go to the NFL this offseason. And now I think it's a pretty definitive thing in my mind that if he continues to play this way, he's going to the NFL. No question.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Absolutely. All right, last guy on the list. One comment to get to first, though, because it's not the defensive player you're going to name. A question about, are you going to mention Alonzo Ford? My opinion is that he is rated right where he should be. So he is having a bigger impact on this year's defense than I think most fans expected. But ultimately, once you heard the coaching staff and the players start talking about him the way they were back in June, where we had full coverage of the assistant coach media day at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, you got the impression that he was at least going to have a role with his team this year, T. Frank. So I think, he has 55 snaps, I believe, so far this year.
Correct.
And pretty much doing what you would expect him to do. Has he come a long way from when he got here? Yes. Did the injury he suffered very soon after he got last year derail his first season at Penn State? Yes. But I think he's probably rated and playing right around the level you would expect. Last guy on your list is Denai Dennis Sutton. Let's talk about him.
Yeah, so Denai has not gotten the number of sacks, and they haven't generally gotten the number of pressures that the team was expecting. And I think part of that is by scheme because of the way that Tom Allen's defense wants to get their hands on the football from an interception standpoint, and they don't do as much from a complexity up front of pass rushing, overwhelming blitzes. Again, I wrote about this, I think it was last week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, but I just want to emphasize the fact that he's playing well. Now, here's the problem. You have a dominant game against Kent State.
Right.
And then you say, well, it's Kent State, but that's the idea. You want to dominate against teams that aren't as good as you.
No, that's
and he
a
got
really
15
good point,
snaps and got out.
That's a really good point. Yes. Go ahead. Keep rolling. I'm sorry, but that's a really good point.
No, that's it. He got 15 snaps in the game. He made difference-making plays. And the problem is, because of the nature of the defense and the personality of the defense, teams are deciding to get rid of the football before Dennis Sutton can get there. And he is not a Chop Robinson who can still get a quarterback hit anyway. That being said, according to PFF, he's got 5 quarterback hits this year. That's a healthy number. So I just think from a hand use perspective, he is what he is. From an athleticism and a pad level perspective, I'd love it if he had the pad level of Zane Durant, as somebody who is 6'1", but he's 6'5", and a high cut 6'5". I think he's doing the best he has with that particular profile. And this is a guy that because of the 5-star status, because of Abdul Carter, he's getting overlooked as this is a guy who's going to be a meaningful contributor,
right?
Later this year. And I think that he's going to continue to have these underrated performances where he gets pressure and he forces the team to do something with the football, but maybe he doesn't get the sack numbers and the glitz and glam that everybody else does, because that's kind of the way he plays. That's just his positional skill set of a big, powerful, strong defensive end that is good against the run, and his rushes are not always the explosive win in 1 second sort of runs. He uses his hands. He's more power based. So those don't win as immediately as often. So I think he's playing well, and people are underrating him because they're expecting him to be something different, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the real zeal, and I'm not sure what context the comment comes in, but I'm going to put it in the context of this conversation. Elite players find ways to make plays. That is true. Mm-hmm. But the plays that are made, T. Frank, I think this is what you're getting at, aren't always ones that show up on the stat sheet. But they can lead the touchdowns. They can lead the sacks. They can lead the quarterback hurries, third downs.
That's the whole point of this, right?
Is
these are guys that don't have the stats but are playing very well and setting the table for other players. Go check out I think it's my pinned post on X, and I'm going to try and respect the fact that it's called X, even though it feels weird.
I won't. It's Twitter.
Okay.
Twitter. It's
good.
Always Twitter. Yes.
All right. Abdul Carter doesn't get that sack without Dejon Lane making a play. So it's a third-string quarterback who's running a particular type of play where you have to throw the ball immediately. You cannot wait and read. You have to get rid of the football. And he doesn't, because Dejon Lane makes him hesitate. If Dennis Sutton was in that position, he would have also made that play. Also, on the second play of the game, he got an immediate pressure on a rollout. So they're rolling away from him intentionally. And he sacks the quarterback, causes a forced fumble, knocks the quarterback out of the game, and changes that game for the rest of the day. And so, those are impact plays. And I think that's where we look. This conversation to me is these are guys that don't have the flashy stats of tackles or sack numbers or receptions on offense, but they are doing the things necessary to make this offense and defense function at a high level.
No question about it. Penn State plays Illinois this Saturday at Beaver Stadium. It's the BWI Live Show. Wednesday before that game, it's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel. T. Frank, let's get into what we've learned about Penn State so far through the non-conference portion of the schedule. And I don't know where we're going to go with this because neither one of us filled out the rundown. So I'm going to open the bidding.
Yeah, you go first.
One of the things I learned about Penn State is that even though James Franklin wants us to buy into the receivers already, and he is 100% correct when he says that there should be as much praise for them after the Kent State game as there has been criticism of them, or questions, I guess, both is probably fair, leading into the season. I'm not quite ready to buy into the group yet, and this week will tell me whether I'm ready to buy in or not. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Because the particular weaknesses of the guys who are playing well, especially, is going to come up in this game. Physical press man coverage. Omari Evans, has he taken that step to become a more robust receiver that can play through different situations? Because they've been playing a lot of zone teams, and they've been playing a lot of teams that are not particularly good on defense, especially from a coverage perspective. And I'm including West Virginia in that. Now, again, they've dominated in these situations. So if you play, what it says to me is like, if you play zone and if you get these matchups, you can't do certain things if you're a smart team. So the next curveball thrown at Penn State is going to be take away those opportunities and how do they play. So to me, yes, I absolutely agree with you that that's a test for overall the receiver room and how they've progressed since last year.
Yes. So that's one thing I've learned so far this season. The second thing for me is that there may be, and this might get you wound up, and I apologize, but there may be some questions about Tony Rojas' ability to tackle. He leads the team with 7. Is that something that concerns you, or have you seen enough on film to think that it's more a product of the plays that have happened so far, more so than that just he can't tackle very well?
No, I am now concerned too. I think it's a fair. One is an outlier, 2 is a trend, 3 is now an ingrained thing. Oh, I meant games, but yeah, 7. No, Seven's important.
I know what you meant. Yes,
he had 5. I think he had 5 through the first 2 games. Mm-hmm. I do think he's a little banged up, but at the same time, I'm seeing the same consistent issues, and I'm not seeing it show up in other areas. So this is the problem with not having an injury report and not having a coach that wants to talk about injuries, because the context of these things we have to guess. So he came out of the Bowling Green game after getting rocked by the running back in his upper body, and then didn't return until the third quarter. And since then, has been a little less powerful through contact than I saw him in the West Virginia game, and then in the previously what we saw from him last year. So there is something where he is not as strong through contact, where he was kind of that prototypical linebacker who was fast enough and strong enough to ignore blocks, like basically defeat them with no impact to his positioning on the field. Now he's running around stuff a little bit more. So I do think that the tackling is an issue at this point. And until we see otherwise, it is something that I'm on board with. Hey, he's a young guy who's learning these things. And so that's one of those, he can be an all-American player, but he has to go through the growing pains of making some mistakes and learning from them. And I guess an area where we learned about him is that tackling.
There's no question about that. Next thing I learned, and then I'll get you into your list. But another thing I learned, T. Frank, that injuries happen. And I don't know if we pay close enough attention outside of the Penn State bubble to teams who we thought would be this or that and are impacted by injuries, but we certainly pay close attention to them here at, with Penn State. And the Nittany Lions are dealing with more of them than they have maybe ever in the James Franklin era, but certainly recently. Yeah. And it's starting to show up in the depth department, no question about it. Yeah,
and that's the question, I think, for recruiting. This is a health. I have a hard time with this, Greg, because there's a couple of things that play when we talk about next man up. Right. Because for some people, it is a mentality that there are no excuses. Every player on the roster has to be ready to play and play at a high level. And if not, coaching is the problem. And that is not a reality that exists. You only have so many reps. You only have so much time. You have to make some choices as to who you're going to prioritize in the growth and development process. Right. So you have to have some context of, do you use those players the same way? And how do you find the creative solution around your problem? That is more to me of the next man up conversation is, can they coach and scheme their way around the deficiencies of those players? And then do those players have enough strengths that you can find a winning formula? Because you can't just, it is not a, it's not a robot army where you shoot one down and another takes its place. Like that's not how this works. So I have a hard time because I don't want to feed the machine that coaches feed themselves, right? So they're always chasing perfection. They preach perfection because they preach that to their team, and they don't want to say two different things to the media and players. But at the same time, it's an unrealistic standard to say every player has to be the next man up in perfection. It's not how this works.
Not going to happen.
So there is a
ever.
Duality there.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I know I told you I'd let you get to your list, but I'm going to create a part of your list for you because I keep seeing it in the comment section. What did you learn about Penn State's decision to move Abdul Carter to defensive end from linebacker over the first 3 games, and to the growing chorus of fans who think Penn State should just move him directly back to linebacker? What would you say to them based on what you learned over the first 3 weeks?
it started out as a decision that I thought was a little bit. I have a hard time phrasing this the way I want to without sounding incendiary. It was a decision that I thought felt more like Abdul doing something that he wanted to do as opposed to something that was good for the team. And it's turned into, it's pretty lucky that they moved him to defensive end with the fact that they've had so much attrition at the depth at that particular position, losing Zariah Fisher and obviously the self-inflicted wounds from the players that were dismissed from the team and all of the things that are going on there, which are far-reaching beyond football. So it turned out to be a good decision. I think in the long term it was anyway.
See, this is where I come down to it. Chad, it hits. So you're moving. It's not. It's too drastic to say it's moving deck chairs on the Titanic, but it sort of is. Like, you can move it back to linebacker, but then you have depth issues at defensive end.
Yeah.
You can move Dakari Nelson back to safety. You still have depth issues then at linebacker. So you can keep moving people around, but at the end of the day, it's still you're going to create depth issues somewhere. I think he's been better at defensive end personally when we talk about the denied Dennis Sutton conversation.
Yes.
I think he's been better at defensive end than he's probably been given credit for on the stat sheet so far.
And a better overall player, too. Again, talk about setting things up for other players. He's been very hard to block as a run defender. He took that seriously, and he's become a very good run defender and has another level of awareness that I wasn't expecting, because I was expecting this to be a little bit of an athlete playing the position as opposed to a defensive end. Give credit to Deion Barnes. Give credit to Abdul Carter for really putting in the work to become a full-time defensive end this offseason. Yeah. Right. And again, going back to teams aren't going to just let you get pressures. And Chop Robinson was a special individual who had unique skills to get to the quarterback in a way that even if you have the physical skill set, you do need some of those other hidden magical talents to really replicate. And so I think Abdul's going to get there in his own way, but it's not going to look as dominant for a bunch of different reasons, because it is his first year at defensive end, as Chop did, during his final season before becoming a first-round pick.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, so what did you learn from 3 weeks? Now that I gave you one of your picks plus like four more, what comes to mind immediately? Just the first thing off the top of your head.
Yeah, Tyler Warren, the team's number one tight end, is the team's number one receiver. They scheme up more plays for Tyler Warren, not just in the passing game as we've seen, but overall than any other player on the team. And that has been James Franklin's directive for the last couple of years is, we have this asset at tight end, use it. And so Andy Kotelnicki is more adept at using that player and his diverse skill sets than other coordinators have been throughout the last couple of years. And I think that speaks volumes about what happens next, and something we're going to talk about at the Sunday Film Study of how do you continue to get him involved? How do you continue to get him touches without forcing the ball in there? And so I think it sets up what they've done so far, that Tyler Warren is the team's number one target, regardless of position, and he's delivered. Sometimes that guy who you trust, you put your faith in, they don't necessarily deliver. He's everything that they have said he is so far.
Yes, there's no doubt about that. Tyler, I was laughing at this. It's hilarious. Tyler Warren, the linebacker. Yep, that'll fix everything.
260-pound linebacker. Everyone wants it. Everybody wants it.
I know you're being sarcastic, Mustard Man. But yeah, so I guess a couple other thoughts here as we get into the Big Ten portion of the season. I also learned that James Franklin made a really good point, and it goes to something Penn State fans are going to find out over the next couple of years. But when you schedule these non-conference opponents, you don't have any idea what you're going to get usually by the time you actually play them. Bowling Green, when Penn State scheduled that game, was not a team that had the outlook of a program ready to maybe have MAC title aspirations. Kent State, on the other hand, was not as bad as it is this year when Penn State scheduled them. And the transfer portal plays a role in this. There's no question about it. But if I learned anything about the non-conference portion, just the scheduling itself, is that the games you think might be terrible ones might actually be competitive, and the games you think might be competitive might actually be terrible. And we certainly learned that. Also, I don't think West Virginia is as good as it was last year.
No. No, and that's another one, kind of to extend that conversation. You schedule Auburn, and you get Auburn at a pretty low time in their history. Not that they've had a consistently high threshold; they've always been up and down. But when you schedule Auburn, however many years it was ago, and then I think it was 5 years before it happened, and then you play that team, and you think, okay, like that's a marquee matchup, and suddenly it's not on the schedule the same way. Now it's still for the coaching staff, it's still like, a lose your hair sort of early non-conference game that you have to play, especially when you're on the road. But I do think that there are some of those things that, as you mentioned, just another example of things you can't really predict when you schedule an opponent so far out in advance.
Before we move on, T. Frank, any final thoughts from the non-conference portion of the schedule?
Yeah, this is something I wrote, I think it was Monday afternoon. And check this one out, because James Franklin talked about how Penn State has thrown the deep ball. And he didn't explicitly say that he tells his quarterbacks to underthrow the deep ball. But he did say if you're going to miss and you miss short, there are more opportunities and possibilities. You force the referee to make a decision about pass interference. Right. So what we've seen from Drew Aller, and what I think there has been this criticism of him that, oh my gosh, these receivers are waiting on the ball. Again, you're always chasing perfection. He said to throw it in stride is better than to overthrow. So, and it's better to underthrow, but if you're going to miss, and so Drew Aller has been rainbowing the ball down the field as opposed to putting velocity on it and trying to be pinpoint with it or trying to lead a receiver too far. That adds context to what he's done so far, which is throw the deep ball at a really high rate, completing 66% of his passes. So it's eliminating those overthrows for sure, but it is not giving him the same level of, I think, highlight and prestige that other quarterbacks do on their deep ball. And so James Franklin says that's going to get better. It has to get better in this particular matchup. We talked about that with the receivers and this particular game. There's going to be tighter coverage. So the margin for error here is lower for Drew Aller.
It is, yeah. And you have one other note here, and I'm sorry if you already covered it, but I don't want to skip anything. But you're talking about man coverage, and I'm assuming you're talking about receivers, or are we talking defense?
The defense. And again, James Franklin talked about this at the beginning of the season. We're going to be a man coverage team, and we had not seen that from Tom Allen before. So it was like, what is the nature of this defense? Because it's not going to be what Manny Diaz did, and it's been clearly Tom Allen's defense, but it hasn't been Tom Allen's defense from Indiana. It is a new iteration of the Penn State defense with Tom Allen at the leading the charge. And so it has been interesting and unique to watch this team develop something not new to Penn State, but new to what I was expecting. So they've played a lot of man coverage. And I think that's something that I'm going to be watching going forward. We're going to be talking about it next. It's just an interesting thing I wasn't expecting necessarily from this defense right off the bat, because it's also not how they played last year either. Like, Manny Diaz's defense was so different while being so similar that these particular plays, it looks different with having kind of maybe the same spirit behind it.
Last one, and it's not on the rundown, but non-conference slate MVP, Tyler Warren, right? No, there's nobody else even in the same stratosphere. Or is there? You tell me.
No, I mean, I just want to give credit to the guys who developed. This is always the problem of, kind of rooting for the underrated guy. And if you can call 2 5-star players underrated guys, but guys that were under fire, Nick Singleton and Drew Aller have been excellent and have risen to the occasion. But Tyler Warren has been, like you said, the focal point of the offense. He's the star of this particular team, and he has been delivering. So you can't go anywhere else other than Tyler Warren for sure.
Anthony, I see your question. We're going to get to that during the Sunday film study, but right now we're going to move into our next segment, which is the last one before the film study, so stay tuned. Young players who stood out last week, and let's open the bidding. T. Frank, thank you. I was looking for that graphic, and I couldn't find it, so I'm glad you did. Let's open the bidding with the linebackers. So obviously Penn State is in a situation at linebacker where it has dealt with some injuries. It has dealt with some guys being bumped and bruised, so to speak. Short-term injuries, no long-term injuries at the moment at that position. But one of the guys you have listed here that I would have listed as well is Tamir Robinson, and then Anthony Speckett led the team in tackles against Kent State. So let's jump off with the linebackers from what we learned against Kent State. Yeah,
do you want to go with Anthony? You want to go? You want to start there and what you saw?
Yeah, so I thought that Penn State put him on the field for a reason, and number one was because it needs to make sure that if he is called up, because only so many more bumps and bruises away from needing to use him this year. Now, I would feel pretty confident their plan is to redshirt him if possible. And so the fact that when you look at how he played, I think he looked like a guy who is on the right path, but should redshirt. But the fact that he got his feet wet is good because we talked about it a few minutes ago, but depth and numbers are an issue at linebacker. So Penn State is in a spot where it needs to make sure these freshmen or younger guys who have not played as much are ready to play. And so I think that getting him out there on the field, you can say what you want. Like, he led the team in tackles, but only 2 of them were solos. So that means he had 3.5 assisted tackles, and that's always amazing to me. The assistant
how they decide who gets a stat in a pile of humanity. Yeah,
exactly. Yes. But I thought for his first college game, he looked more than past the eye test from just a looks perspective, and played fine too.
Yeah, and so some of the things that we've talked about with some of the other linebackers, depth linebackers, I don't think tackling was an issue for him going up against the same players, right? The first team for Kent State did not leave the football game, so he was able to tackle, and I thought he was in position, and all those things are good. I'm looking here now because I think this is important about that redshirt status. They would prefer to redshirt him. Can they redshirt him? Because I'm double checking the roster to make sure I didn't miss anybody. But here is the weak side linebacker depth chart. Tony Rojas, Dom DeLuca. Both those guys have been banged up at some point during this season so far. And then after that, I would put Kobe King, which means you would have to move him over from Mike linebacker and then insert Tyler Elsdon. And then you get to Anthony Specca. So if Specca can be ready so they don't have to get to moving Kobe King, if he can be at the same level relatively as the production you would get from Tyler Elsdon playing full-time, you want to keep Kobe King where he is. So I do think it is important for his development and why he got so many snaps. And that's why I'd say from Tammy Robinson, he can provide you that same potential at Mike linebacker. And this is also for projecting to 2025, in my opinion, with Tammy Robinson and having him next to Tony Rojas and the whole TNT thing they had from their recruiting class and how they came in and wanted to be linebackers together.
Right.
At 6'4" or 6'3" or whatever he is with 36-inch or 39 or 51-inch arms, Tamir is huge. I think on his development curve, he can be 245 pounds and be a complete middle linebacker for Penn State in a throwback way that Kobe King is, while still maintaining that level of speed. But watching him in the game, I thought there were some mental things that you could see because he was in the game when the actual game plan was being deployed, as opposed to we're running base offense and defense by both teams in the second half. And he struggled with some concepts of what gap he was supposed to be in. So there's positives, but there's stuff to take from that of there's still some time he needs to develop what the mental side of things of being a linebacker.
No doubt about it. And I think that is what games like Kent State are for, right? So obviously it's a payday for Kent State, and it's also a chance for Penn State to get ready for Big Ten play. It's also a chance to get some of these guys real game film to teach off of. James Franklin, that was one of the first things he said after the game. And I think sometimes we forget that there's a lot of value in practice, but there's only so much value from that tape because like T. Frank and I doing this show together every week, I have a pretty good idea which way he's going to go, and he has a pretty good idea which way I'm going to go. So at some point, not that we're grading our podcast tape, though I guess we could. But
it's called an air check, and I've never done one of those.
Yeah, right. It becomes a little bit predictable, but when you have game tape and you're using that and obviously the opponent has no idea what you're supposed to be doing, it just goes a lot further, in my opinion, to show guys what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, and how they can be doing better. Next one on your list.
You also don't get as many full-time, you don't get full speed reps in practice. So you can, I always remember, so I grew up on a farm. And my brother wanted me to drive a piece of equipment over to a field. So I followed him in his truck while I was driving a tractor, and I drove super slow. And he was teasing me when we got over there. He's like, "What in the world were you doing?" I said, "Okay, I'm not great at driving the tractor. If I hit your truck, that's 100% more damage to your insurance because those are both your equipment. So if you get an injury in practice, that's 2 players that you're going to injure of your own. You lose 100% more. In a game like Kent State, you get full speed reps to see how guys actually perform under the pure speed and duress of football."
No question about that. Next guy on your list, well, I guess you want to flip over to offense or do you want to stick with defense? I was going to go to Cooper Cousins, but tell me where you want to go next.
Let's do offense and we'll get back to defense. Yeah, Cooper Cousins, kind of like Tamer Robinson, but we got a larger sample size. Watched him make some mistakes on film and then grow from those mistakes when the situation arose later. So there's two things about Cooper. He is incredibly smart, and you love when you see the growth real time, because that means he's going to apply those things he learned and he's going to not forget them in the future. Like, this is a guy who seems to have a very a shallow learning curve as opposed to a steep one, even though that doesn't make as much sense. He learns things very quickly. And so I think that that's something that is very positive for his contribution later in the year. And the second thing is, he is really strong. Like, he was getting into double teams with other guys and honorable mention to Nolan Rucci and his run blocking this year. He's a difference maker as a run blocker when he gets into some of these situations. He and Cooper Cousins had some really strong run blocks against Kent State, which you didn't see from some of the other young offensive linemen. So the growth and then the potential are all there for Cooper Cousins. We got to see our biggest sample of that last week.
Yeah, I honestly, Phil Troutline said last week that he believes Cooper Cousins will be a part of their top five sooner rather than later. And there's a part of me that's just starting to wonder, and I don't want to take too much away from 3 non-conference games, but if he's going to replace somebody on this offensive line at some point this season, I don't know if he will on a full-time basis.
I don't know where, though, Greg.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? Problem is where. Right.
Because you've got a 6th year or 7th year, I don't remember which it is. I think it's a 6-year offensive lineman for Sal Wormley, and he's been playing as the right guard. Cooper Cousins has been primarily playing as right guard. We have seen him more snaps at right guard than left. He has taken no snaps at center. In a game where they got down to their 3rd string center, he was not the 3rd option. Right. So I just don't see him as an option at center this year. So if you're saying Nick Dawkins, that's not going to happen. I also didn't love the way that Venga Ioane's power and kind of his burst in athleticism were a little muted at center. So the other thing you could do is move him to left guard and move Vega to center. I don't see that being a good idea of taking your best offensive lineman who's playing his best and moving his position. So I don't see where he is a starter this year, but he can be the 6th offensive lineman for sure.
No question about it. T. Frank, I'm going to roll us ahead. It's his Wednesday, September 25th version of the BWI Live Show. We got to get into Illinois and your Sunday film study, but just any final things that stood out to you from Kent State. The one I will point out is, yes, Tyzier Denmark played. No, that does still not mean he is going to be the savior of the offense. He could be, but just because he played against Kent State does not change anything that we've talked about in previous weeks.
Just when they played him, I think, speaks volumes about the situation, too. Like, Cooper Cousins played in the first half. Tamer Robinson played in the first half. Dejon Lane played the most snaps of any defender. Those are the guys they're trying to get up to speed as soon as possible. And Tysier came at the end of the game when it's like, let's get these guys some live fire reps and see how they do and get them the teaching that you talked about. So I think that speaks to where Penn State sees him on this particular season projection. Not to say he hasn't made strides. We've talked about those strides here and at the site, but just even in that non-conference game where he is right now on the depth chart, I think that's pretty clear.
Yes. All right, let's get into the Sunday film study and Illinois, Penn State. To some of the chatter going on in the chat earlier in the show, Penn State is a 17-point favorite at FanDuel. It is a 19-point favorite at ESPN Bet, and some other operators have numbers in between both of those, so you can pretty much find whatever number you're looking for. But, T. Frank, let's start with the Sunday film study. Was Kent State all practice for Illinois? I'm going to let you take it and run for there. Did Penn State put stuff on tape that, A, made Illinois think, and B, prepared the players to deal with what they're going to face against Illinois on Saturday?
So I have the strong opinion that Penn State could have had a Tennessee level experience against Kent State.
What you're saying is they didn't have to get the over on the final play of the game. They could have had the over in hand much sooner.
Yes. I think they came out specifically in that game to work on things. They want to win the game, and they want to score those points, and they want to put those players in the second half. But they also use it as an opportunity, essentially as a practice for something they need to get better at. So this came in on the mailbag yesterday. I wanted to throw this on here because Bruno Sultanum is a regular here on the show. He asked a good question. Do you think the schemes used against Kent State to get everyone the ball, specifically on third down, will work against better defenses? Greg, they used exactly one passing play to get all of their first downs on third down.
Right.
They used the same play over and over and over again. And it's a very common play that wins against both man and zone coverage. James Franklin talked about, and again, this is how this works. James Franklin is ordering at a restaurant. He says, I want more third downs on my menu. I want more third down conversions. The chef has to go and chef that up. And Andy Kotelnicki delivered that. Like, after the edict and the directive came down from James Franklin, we want more balance. We want more third down conversions. Drew Allar's average depth of target on third down dropped by 6 yards. They focused on just getting conversions and then using a scheme that I think works well against Illinois, specifically for the next week. So a lot of what we saw on offense is a preamble and is I don't want to say a warning shot, but it is a preamble to what Illinois should expect from Penn State. Like, they put that on film specifically for Illinois to know. What they didn't do, Greg, was run the football on third down and short. So to me, those are the iterations of what do you take from Kent State? It is what we didn't see and how that fits into what they did do. That's the unpredictable, unprecedented part of what they will do this upcoming week. I think that was a pure setup for the next game.
No, I think you're right. And I think that you're going to see some of that on Saturday. It's one of the reasons why I know a lot of people were questioning why Penn State was such a big favorite for this game. But I think that some of the stuff we saw them do against Kent State, you're going to see them do against Illinois and have more success. But T-Frank, I want to get to another question. This comes from the Lions Den message board, Southside Line, I believe, is how much can you take away from what AK did against Illinois last year, given the difference in personnel? So before you answer that, I want to remind everyone that you can also ask questions on the Lions Den message board. Use promo code WEARE for 50% off an annual subscription to Blue White Illustrated. Just go over to bluewhiteillustrated.com. Once you get over there, you'll see the big join button. Click it, enter promo code WEARE, and get 50% off an annual subscription as Penn State starts Big Ten play. But T-Frank, what can you take away from what Andy Kotelnicki did last year against Illinois when he was at Kansas?
This goes back to the Kent State game, and this is why I get frustrated, Greg. I get frustrated when I see people say, this is just a scrimmage. You can't take anything away from this. And it's like, okay, like, if you don't try, if you want to just like skim across the pond, sure. But there's always another level to this stuff. And, you know, that's obviously, I always am the guy who's swimming down deep, who's not skimming across the surface. So I take a little bit of exception to that. But there is this kind of bland analysis of, I didn't really want to dig into it, so we can't take anything from the non-conference season. To me, that is incorrect, because this question from Southside Lion, I was thinking about it and it hit me that what they were doing against Kent State was the exact thing they did against Illinois last year at Kansas. The scheme of trying to get Nick Singleton to the outside on that jet sweep, getting Katron Allen to the outside on that jet sweep, is the same play in a different package than what they were doing at Kansas. So again, this was all a message to Illinois: be ready for these things. And that is what James Franklin talks about with chasing ghosts, because they might just not do that next week. Sure. But there were parts of that play. And again, I went into the film analysis at bluewhiteillustrated.com to show you the specific tweak to give them the same actions that they had at Kansas with Drew Aller at quarterback instead of Jalen Daniels, that provide the danger in that play outside of just Nick Singleton taking the football. So absolutely, you can take what we saw against Kent State and project that to Illinois, because their weakness is speed. They have a big physical front seven, and what Andy Kotelnicki did last year is use speed laterally to attack the seams of the defense straight ahead, or, you know, on jet sweeps. So that's going to happen again. And then it comes, how does he do it outside of what we've already seen? What are the wrinkles that play off of that? And then how does the passing game filter into that once they have them running side to side? I do believe that's going to be the plan again. How it takes shape, I think we saw the first initial chess piece move last week, because they could have run, I guess this is the thing, Greg. What they could have done against Kent State from a schematic perspective wasn't necessarily what they did. There were other things they could have done that would have been more effective against that particular scheme. They ran more man-beating concepts against that scheme early in the game than I was expecting. And if I think about it in the light of, they're going to play Illinois next week, and they probably didn't scheme specifically to stop or beat Kent State, that makes way more sense. So once they decided they wanted to score points in the second half, they started being aggressive and throwing the ball down the field.
Yeah,
plain and simple. Like I saw that as a warm up for this game.
Right. I agree with Kevin. I wrote this yesterday at BlueIllustrated.com. I think Illinois is extremely overrated. If you look at ESPN, not that the data is the only way to do this, but the ESPN FPI, they're in the 40s. Bill Connolly's SP Plus, they're in the 40s. Somehow they're in the top 25 of the coaches poll and the AP top 25. If you look at the Nebraska box score, or if you watch the game, you have a better feel for it. Nebraska beat itself more than Illinois beat it, in my opinion. Kansas, West Virginia just beat Kansas. We said earlier that we don't think West Virginia is as good as they were last year, so I'm not as impressed by that one anymore. Statistically speaking, Illinois is in the middle of the pack of the Big Ten in every category for the most part, except for one. Turnover margin.
Yep.
They are very good at creating turnovers. They have 10 on the season, and they are very good at protecting the ball. Luke Altmaier, the quarterback for Illinois, does not have an interception. He has thrown, I believe, 10 touchdown passes, and as a team, they have 3 turnovers total. So they are one of the top turnover margin teams in the country. T. Frank, as we wind down this edition of BWI Live, I know there's some other things on the rundown I'll let you get to, but my just big takeaway is if Penn State does what it has done very well over the last few years, and in the James Franklin era in general, and not turn the ball over, I just have a really difficult time seeing not only this game being close, but Illinois having a chance to pull off the upset.
Penn State, again, I think you just nailed it. Penn State would have to play a worse game than they've played all year on both sides of the ball for that to happen. Where, here's the thing, and I talked about this last week. I'm going to talk about it a little more in depth here, and we're going to talk about Luke Altmaier, the quarterback. Better does not mean best. He is better than he was last year. He has improved at not doing stupid things with the football.
Right.
Not doing stupid things with the football and making some plays does not equate to making all of the plays. He is not from, this is why you watch the as much of the film as you can to understand what could have happened and where the process is. There are some plays where if you have an NFL mind and an NFL arm, you throw the ball there. And I'm not saying Drew Aller does it every single time, but he does it more often.
Right.
So this idea that there's this battle of quarterbacks that are even-handed or even-footed or even torsoed, there is no equation where these two are even. Drew Aller is an NFL quarterback, and Luke Altmaier, while having some NFL tools, I think he's got a strong arm, he is not playing he's playing at the level of a good college quarterback, which has a limit to it because you're not making some of those difference-making throws, especially over the middle of the field. What they've been doing is if you give them a coverage he's aware of, he knows, and you give him a pre-snap and he is able to diagnose and throw to his first read, he's fine. Like, he's a good quarterback. He did that last year against Penn State, where they played press man coverage and they threw to the slot receiver. Daquan Hardy gave up some first downs. Suddenly, they started disguising coverage, sending zone blitzes, and he melted. He's not going to melt this year, but in those situations, what he does is he breaks the pocket. He runs. He limits his opportunities by not staying calm and working through his play. Sometimes he does. So again, this is not a sweeping thing. He has improved. Sometimes he can find his check down or he'll get to the next progression. But more times than not, it's much closer to he doesn't see and doesn't know and is just safe with the football, as opposed to what Penn State is doing, which is any opportunity you give them, any mistake you make, Drew Aller is going to take advantage. Andy Kolnicki's going to put you in position to make mistakes. And then Nick Singleton and Katron Allen are going to cause you problems. So offensively, Penn State would have to do none of those things. And defensively, they'd have to play just man coverage. They'd have to give him exactly what he's going to get all game and not change or adapt. And we've seen them against Bowling Green change and adapt when they had a quarterback who was challenging them with some of their concepts. And they have done some things, again, a thing from our film study you want to go check out, to help with those man coverage and rub routes. They did some of those things against Kent State. Again, if you're saying there's nothing to learn against Kent State, you're not paying attention. Those are the things that we can learn, that they did change and adapt some things during their bye week to help with this upcoming game. And if you do those things, Luke Altmaier is going to have a problem. And to me, that's the ball game. Can you make him turn the ball over? Because I think that's still possible.
Yes, there's absolutely no question about that. Last thing before we get going here on this edition of BWI Live, David's asked this a couple times and it keeps coming up. Brett Bielema, please go watch the whole news conference. T. Frank, I don't know. I'll put it in the YouTube chat comments after the show. But if you go watch the whole video of what Brett Bielema said, yes, the thing that's grabbing all the attention is him saying, whatever the hell whiteout energy is. But the whole quote is very respectful of Penn State. And if you listen to the whole thing, no, I don't think he's going to regret it. I regret the fact that people have latched on to this whiteout and that's all they hear. And also, what is white?
Yeah. It's a fair question.
It is. Well, what is it? I mean, look, it's the second. It's an unofficial whiteout, is what it is, right?
Right.
If Penn State would just call it that, and I understand why they don't do that, but that's where we're at. That's where I'm at with that at this point.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of his press conference, and even before then, the way he says stuff, how he phrases things, and just his tone, there is there's a way that people have charisma, right? People are innately likable. Brett Bielema does not have that. So when he says something and you take it a certain way, it's easy to take it that way because he has a way of coming off during a press conference. And I think that's also at play there as well.
Yes, I think so too. Well, T. Frank, final thoughts. I know we're over the hour mark, so I'll give it to you. Any final thoughts, and we'll get out of here on the Wednesday edition of BWI Live.
Yeah, I'm just going to continue to do a little more film study and give a little more context to this game. I want to be a little more specific with how I think this is going to play out. The offensive line for Illinois is better. Again, better, but doesn't mean good. I think Penn State has a distinct advantage there from an athleticism and a performance standpoint on the ground. And then I guess the other thing is we had a lot of really good questions in the BWI mailbag. I'm going to sit down today and answer a lot of those. I didn't have a chance yesterday. So if you ask a question, there's a lot of people here that listen to the podcast or watch the show. I just want you to know, we're going to answer as many of those as possible in the best way we can, which is to give you, a full follow-up article. There's so many good ones. And I want to get to a couple of them here and then later, either today or later this week.
Well, please join us at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Don't forget, we're running a flash sale for the Big Ten opener for Penn State. Use promo code WEARE for 50% off an annual subscription at bluewhiteillustrated.com. That's promo code WEARE for 50% off an annual subscription. Easy for me to say, T. Frank, at the end of an hour-long show at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Promo code WEARE for 50% off an annual subscription. Yeah, I agree with you on the way this Illinois-Penn State game should play out. I was surprised the spread was so big at first. I am not anymore. The more I watch Illinois, the more I think that it's not. I wrote the way I phrased it this morning was, it's not smoke. It's unfair to say they've won via smoke and mirrors, but there are some smoke and mirrors that have resulted in some of the outcomes that they have so far this year. It's no other way to put it as far as I'm concerned. So we will have more coverage of Penn State, Illinois at bluewhiteillustrated.com. I did see some recruiting questions in the chat. Sean and Ryan will be with T. Frank on Thursday for all the latest info on recruiting and also Illinois Penn State predictions. I believe you guys do on Thursday as well. Yep. So we'll have plenty of that going on, and you can always obviously read everything we have to say at bluewhiteillustrated.com. We will be back next time, but thank you all for tuning in, and this has been the Wednesday, September 25th edition of BWI Live.